ecosystem collapse, and climate change. And I thought that 30 years of good science could address these problems. I was wrong. The top environmental problems are selfishness, greed, and apathy. And to deal with these, we need a cultural and spiritual transformation. And we scientists don't really know how to do that. And this is the crux of what I want to talk to you about today. How can we enable the teaching of science, technology, engineering, and mathematics to actually embrace values education in order to prepare our students with the right knowledge and skills and attitudes and competencies that they can go forward and address these problems, particularly if they're going to be teachers going into schools in rural and remote areas. The United Nations released a plan called the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. And in there are three basic principles. We must focus on improving the well-being of humanity and the planet, not just the planet, but humanity as well. The two are totally interlinked and interdependent. This is an intergenerational commitment, as the second speaker just outlined. We have to think about the impact that we are having on the world in terms of our children and their children, and so on and so on and so on. An intergenerational commitment to ensure that future generations are going to be endowed with a world that is safe and healthy. And of course, to do this, we must invoke a moral imperative. And this is about developing and promoting and educating our young people into ethical values. And I'll have some more to say about that in just a moment. Typically, in traditional teaching of science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, and I've been a teacher in those areas for almost 40 years, we have the following: the outer world of objects and systems and patterns, and the inner world that students bring with them into the classroom. Now, typically, in teaching STEM subjects in schools and even in teacher education programs in universities, we get the students to put all of their focus on the outer world, to understand about the object systems and patterns of the world outside of themselves. And we put a little bit of focus on the inner world of the students in terms of helping them to understand about the outer world. But we don't really give them much opportunity to understand about themselves. The types of values that we get them to develop are values of objectivity, where they make their own values and their own beliefs and their own feelings, put them aside in order to develop this objective knowledge about the external world. I'll just refer you to a book by Linda Jean Shepherd called Lifting the Veil, The Feminine Face of Science. Linda Shepherd is a biochemist, and she's written a wonderful book that I've been reading just recently. And she contrasts what she calls the two faces of science, the masculine face of science and the feminine face of science. So typically, science as we know it, as we've experienced ourselves as students, and then as teachers in schools and universities, typically has a masculine face. In other words, and this goes back historically to the early 1800s, 1500s in fact, in Europe, when natural history suddenly transformed into something called modern science. So typically the view of nature is something that is out there beyond us that we need to tame and exploit. And the scientists take a reductionist approach. They take some variables, extract them from the natural world, and examine the relationship between these tiny parts using what we call cold logic, analytical, deductive, propositional logic. And there's not much room in there from emotions, feelings, and intuition and dreaming. This is very much an objective approach, as I mentioned a moment ago, where you leave a lot of your humanity aside and just get on with the job of reducing the natural world to several interlocking variables. There's a very mechanistic view of the world. Newton talked about the world as a huge clockwork mechanism. And the idea is that if you could understand the small parts and put them all back together again, you'd understand the whole. I use this notion of the myth of Apollo, a Greek god, to represent the masculine face of science, and I'll bring him back into the picture in just a moment. Now, Linda Shepherd spends a lot of really productive time in her book contrasting the masculine with the feminine view. And I'll just hasten to add that masculine does not necessarily mean biological male, and feminine doesn't necessarily mean biological female. Within each one of us, both men and women, we have both of these faces, but we tend to males tend to be largely masculine, and we talk about a patriarchal society, and women tend to be more feminine, but that is not necessarily endowed upon us. It's not inevitable. And the argument here is that men can develop their feminine side and women can develop their masculine side. So with the feminine view of science, there's a connection or a love of nature. It's understanding how the parts that we examine belong to the broader context of science. For example, how we as individuals are actually an integral part of the biosphere of our planet. We're not separate from it, we're part of it. The understanding that feminine science brings is a warm empathy, bringing their feelings and their intuition into their investigations of the natural world, and bringing their subjectivity into the foreground. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the subjectivity, the I and the me and the we, rather than the it. So this is an organic view of science, and I use the myth of Isis, an Egyptian goddess, to represent the feminine face of science. Now, at the moment, if you're using binary logic, saying A or B, you can't have both of these, then I'm going to just let you know that that's not the case. Linda Shepherd argues that we need to have both faces of science operating at the same time, or perhaps interchangeably. And I'll represent this by bringing Apollo and Isis together into a warm embrace. And as Linda Shepherd said, as we discover more about nature, we discover more about ourselves. So going back to the way in which we teach science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, what I'm arguing here is that we don't just get students to focus on the world out there, but on the world inside themselves at the same time. So how do we do this? I'm calling this a socially responsible view of STEM education. So you can see on the right-hand side with the inner world of students, we're now expanding their educational experiences so that they bring their feelings, their emotions into the foreground. They learn to connect not just with the natural world, but with each other through empathy. And they begin to expand their values from objectivity into a set of eco-justice values, ethical values. So what we have here in our students, and this is so important if we're going to send new science STEM teachers out into our schools to help our students to become more fully human, we're asking them to develop not just their objective knowledge, but their subjective knowledge, their knowledge of themselves as well. Bringing the two together is a holistic view of our understanding of the world and ourselves. So what is transformation when I talk about transformative STEAM education? There's a couple of images that might just play on your imagination for a moment. It's perhaps about understanding what's framing our worldview and perhaps looking out beyond that framework. It's like the chicken whose world is inside the egg, and suddenly it breaks the egg and comes out and, oh, a paradigm shift. The world is much larger and much more complex and interesting and exciting than I thought it was inside the shell. And as the caterpillar said to the butterfly, "You've changed." And the butterfly says, "Yeah, we're supposed to. We're supposed to go through a transformation, a metamorphosis. We're not supposed to stay the same all our lives. We're meant to become more fully human." Now I'll turn to Claire Zammit, who is a counsellor, and she's written a book recently called The Feminine Power Breakthrough. And she defines transformation in the following terms: psychological, that is a profound change in understanding of ourselves, of our inner worlds; convictional, a profound change in values and vision about other people and about nature, that is about the outer world; and behavioural is about developing a profound change in our social roles and practices, focusing on both the inner and outer worlds together. So STEM education on the left-hand side, focuses on developing disciplinary knowledge, disciplinary skills, and those limited values of objectivity that I referred to earlier. What we're now looking at is, on the right-hand side, developing more than that, developing students' transformative capabilities, helping them to go from the caterpillar to the butterfly stage. So those capabilities include learning to be critically self-reflective, finding out where your values come from, and asking ourselves, are they appropriate values to address the global problems in the world around us? Empathic understanding. We can't really overcome our antagonisms and our violences to our loved ones and to our culturally different others unless we have empathic understanding that we can decenter from our egotistic selves and reach out and embrace the culturally different other and nature, the natural world. And this is where ethical and moral values are so important. We can't afford to educate our kids simply in objectivity alone. It is important. It's part of the masculine face of science, but we also must bring the feminine face of science into our classrooms and help our students to develop their ethical and moral values. Critical social thinking looks around the world and says, what are the problems? What's the source of the problems? For example, with plastic shopping bags, why do we use plastic shopping bags? Yes, they are convenient, but on the other hand, what is the cost to the environment? And whose interests are best served by producing and selling and making available the shopping bags? So this is a critical social perspective on industry, on economics. And finally, practical agency is about helping our students not just to learn all of this in a theoretical way in the classroom, but to go outside of the classroom into their local communities, into their families, and for teachers who are becoming new teachers, student teachers, to go out into the schools and to be agents of change, to bring all these new transformative capabilities into their teaching practices. This is where the arts are so important. I don't think STEM alone can just achieve that. It needs help. Teachers of science, technology, engineering, and mathematics need some further professional development. And what better place can they turn to than the arts? Arts education, which is the source of creativity, developing the imagination, the source of how do we develop our sense of beauty? I mean, it's so important not just to understand that the natural world is essential, but to appreciate its beauty. And that's a feeling thing, that's an emotional thing. Ethics, as I've said, is such an important issue here. Ethics of eco-justice and ethics of social justice. Having a conscience about, making the world a better place and having a sense of, I should be helping to do this in my own life and in the lives of others, particularly if you're a teacher. And rhetoric, developing the ability to speak and write in a very persuasive, communicative way to help other people, as educators should do, to develop their own consciousness. So I'll give you one quick example here of where this is all taking place. And I'm very happy to say that Dr. Yulia Ramwati, who's now recently made head of chemistry education at Universitas Negeri Jakarta, in her Master of Teaching program, she develops in her students both chemistry knowledge and skills from the discipline and these transformative learning capabilities. She focuses on situating chemicals into their everyday use. So when you're talking about, look at that box down the bottom, organic chemistry, she can have her students focus on what are the health effects of preservatives in food, formalin in food. As I mentioned before, when you're studying polymers, what's the side effect here of the plastic waste and pollution? Electrolytes, energy drinks, are they good for us? Are they good for our health if we consume lots and lots and lots of drinks that give us a buzz, for example, and all that sugar that we're consuming at the same time, and so on and so on. Use cooking oil, use batteries, what is the impact of the side effects of the use of chemicals in everyday life? And she engages her master's students in action research projects where they investigate what we call ethical dilemmas. That is the economics on the one side versus the health on the other side. And there is a tension between these two things, the profit-making interests of business and industry versus the health interests of people and communities. And how do these two things fit together? There is a tension there. And how do we argue for a resolution between those competing interests? So ethical dilemmas is such an important strategy, new pedagogy for helping our students, particularly students who are going to be teachers, in this case of chemistry in our local schools, to bring much more than the knowledge and skills of chemistry discipline into the classrooms in the schools throughout Indonesia. So just summing up here, transformative STEAM education for a sustainable world, 4 aspects of it. First is having the understanding and the commitment to developing a socially responsible STEM education, bringing the ethical values of sustainability into the mix so that expands students' awareness of the role of STEM in the world around them. Developing in students these transformative capabilities, helping them to develop their own higher conscience and to bring ethical values of sustainability into their own lives and practices. And finally, for teachers of STEM subjects, reaching out to colleagues and collaborating on curriculum development in an interdisciplinary manner. There's a book that we are publishing that will be coming out early next year. My good wife, Dr. Elizabeth Lilly Taylor, and myself are editing the book, and we're having contributions from our graduate students and colleagues in Australia, Nepal, and I'm pleased to say Indonesia as well. Jakarta, as I mentioned, also UNISA and UNIMED in Medan. And we're covering the elementary, secondary, pre-service and postgraduate levels of education. The book will demonstrate how STEAM education is being put into practice at these different levels by bringing the arts into STEM disciplines. So I'll leave you with one little joke here. The earth without art is just air. And if it's just air, it's not really worth much, is it? Bringing the arts into STEM education enhances our appreciation of the inherent value of our planet and its ecosystems and its diverse species and our own participation and belonging in the biosphere, the interdependence between humanity and the natural world, with a commitment to future generations, an intergenerational moral and ethical commitment. So thank you very much for your kind attention, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Now we are in the discussion and question session. Please mention your name and where are you from? Professor, what does the traditional STEAM learning mean? Would you like to explain me more?
I'm sorry, I only caught about 3 words from that question. As the previous speakers were requesting, it would be very helpful if you could write your question in the Q&A section of the Zoom program or in the chat section, and then I could read it, make sense of it, and respond accordingly. Thank you.
Any question? The other one, would you like to ask to our professor? The time is 2 minutes more.
Sorry. the acoustics coming from the room that you're sitting in are not the best. It sounds an echo chamber. It's very, very hard to hear and to understand.
Okay, if no question more, the time is over. Thank you very much for your join in this seminar, and see you next time. So that very, very important thing what you explain for us today, and I hope Professor we can meet at another time in another place, and thank you very much.
I think I understand. Thank you. Terima kasih banyak.
Okay, next will be present or leader by Bu Dewi.
Thank you. Is that hidup? Oh ya. Good afternoon. Yeah. Good afternoon for all the keynote speaker. Now it's my turn to be a moderator for the next keynote speaker, Dr. Samsudin L. Taya, the Professor of Political Science, DABOCM. How to spell it? BORM? Yes, something like that. Okay, for the personal details, we should know together that Professor Samsudin was born on September 25th, 1970. Citizenship from Philippines. Yeah, the religion is Islam, and has the PhD in international relation, the field of study international relation of University of Malaysia, UUM. Okay. Okay. Can you hear Professor Samsudin? Can you hear me? Professor Samsudin, can you hear me? Hello.
I think the chairperson call for Mr. Samsudin, or maybe your turn. I cannot hear also.
Mr. Samsudin, can you hear me? I don't think so. Okay. Or maybe we can change the moderator to be Professor
Hello.
Hermin first.
Is it my turn?
Enggak. Pakai itu. Oh, halo. Professor Samsudin, can you hear me?
Yes, yes, I can. Is it my turn? Hello? Hello?
Yeah,
Okay, can you hear me?
yeah, I can hear you. And can you
Uh,
hear me too? Okay,
is
let's
it my turn? I just, hello? Is it my turn, isn't it?
it we cannot be understand, yeah. Mechanical trouble sometimes. I think we should continue. Again, we can start now. For the efficiency, I would like to ask you to make it simple. The presentation in 20 to 25 minutes only. Maybe you can start your presentation, Professor.
Yes, it's my turn, isn't it? Hello?
Yeah,
Can you hear?
yeah, I can hear you. I can hear you.
Okay, thank you very much, Samantha. For the first, in the first place, thank you very much for inviting me in this very important conference.
Mhm.
And my great also to my colleagues, my fellow keynote speakers, the attendees. So, good afternoon. Okay, I'm Samsudin El Taya. Um, I'm now attached in the newly created Bangsamoro autonomous government in Muslim Mindanao as a head of research. So today I'm going to talk about management, how the Philippine government managed the 2000 the coronavirus 19, the pandemic. So I think I look more on the politics. Mainly, I'm looking to things here. What are those the measures or policy uh, adopted by the Philippine government, especially under Philippine President Duterte, and how this policy implemented that led to not many are talking about what called the politics of the pandemic. So it's really like the issue of the problem that I'm going to talk later on. Uh, if you look at the first Philippine government, what are those actions? I will go directly. What are those actions or measures adopted by the Philippine government? So mainly on the March 7, 2020, so when the Department of Health raised some alert so about the coronavirus, the issue of coronavirus. And then later on it was followed by the Department of Trade and Industry. And later on March 9, 2020, 16, March 16, 2020, Philippine President signed proclamation number 19, declaring a state of emergency in the Philippines, in the whole country. So this the declaration mainly specifically talking about the price control, the granting of interest free, and some others. Because I'm not really concerned about too much detailing this, but I'm concerned about what are these specific policy and how this policy politicized, especially when it comes to implementation. So there's issues there. So I think I'm I need to share. And then another important for some other purposes. So what happened when it comes to the implementation, especially those specific I mentioned about special appropriation and special assistant help or program for the people, for the victims of this pandemic. So what really a big issue that I think is important to discuss is I mentioned just now is how this the pandemic was politicized. One, as a result of this emergency, as a result of this policy, so all the local government units, so they were authorized to some extent to use the special funds, emergency funds. So with this access to emergency funds, then that's start the real politics, because they can use those funds less and it is less scrutiny under the normal laws that lies mainly on the COA or the commission. So they have the free will to do that. So with this comes the issue of misuse of those money. Though some you can see it reaches to its the targeted people that they targeted benefits, but most of those the funds, if you see, so it went somewhere it didn't read exactly. And the second thing I think is very important here is the issue of the control. So because of this pandemic, that the local government, especially when it was implemented, what we call the quarantine. So when this quarantine implemented, so they have the power to do so. So what did some in some I think maybe even most. So they use this power. Mainly is mainly not really to address the problem, but rather to staple those whom they believe, those whom they feel that it is against them. Especially I'm talking about the opponent. So the real issue here, as I mentioned, is it's not really an intention of policy itself, but rather it was lies on the implementation, where some of those irresponsible politicians, the local politicians, so some sort of misusing, misleading, and so on. So by this situation, that's why there was some sort of panicking. So that has a far-reaching implication in terms of our economy, in terms of the social the issues, in terms of education, and so on, so forth. So why I think this exactly happened, I think. If you look at the context of the Philippines, I think those policy that it was crafted from the very beginning, it is not really well formulated for simple reason because there's a lack of partnership or between the Philippine government and those the academician and the experts. So they suspect others. So that's why I observe that most of those policy, the adopted by the government, especially in the local, because they have some authority given to. It is poorly formulated because of those issue of they don't have a good relationship between those in power or the local government and those especially the academician and some other group. So and then another issue surrounding here in the local is some police, especially in those power. So they are using this pandemic as a justification and a move so that the 2022 election will not push through. So in short, what I'm trying to use here, despite the effort of our president to address some and these, but because of some of those in the local government, you need the local politicians, so that's why it creates some a problem. So that's why you can see, if you look at the percentage. So the COVID in the Philippines has become a very serious according to the numbers. So some say even we are the land of the COVID. The Philippines is the land of the COVID. But one thing I think I want to share. I think those facts, those percentage of the data that it has shown, I think there's something there that we need to scrutinize because some some politicians in their respective provinces. So usually, there's some that we heard that they wanted more COVID positive. So as a result of that one, even those the patients that they are not positive, some even they had the accident. I got the accident, and when I come out from the hospital, and then later on the families just knew that they were positive COVID. So what I'm trying to see here is the COVID is there. But the problem that we are facing here is local politicians usually exaggerated. They exaggerated the COVID for their own respective political interests. So as a result of that, that's why you can see, and until now, even yesterday, so I saw so thousands of those confirmed positive according to the Department of Health. So I think that's only that I can talk. So thank you very much, and then I will hand over to the organizer. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your short and briefly presentation, Professor Samsudin. Maybe we should wait for some question for the participants. Any participant would like to give a question for Professor Samsudin, please?
Yes, sure.
Is there any question for the participant for Professor Samsudin? No? Okay. It means that your presentation may be very short and very short to be understand. Maybe some trouble makes some noise that participant couldn't hear so clearly, but we can understand it. Thank you very much for Professor Samsudin. For the next keynote speaker,
Okay, thank you.
I would like to present Professor Dr. Philosophy Hermin Indah Wahyuni SIP MSc. Guten Tag, Professor. Herzlich willkommen to our seminar in ICoSPOLHM.
Dankeschön, Dankeschön.
Herzlich willkommen. Ich komme aus TU Ilmenau, Professor.
Ach so. So, wir sprechen Deutsch dann.
Genau. Und freut mich hier. Ich bin Dwi. Ich bin Dozentin hier in Kommunikation und Wissenschaft, yeah, at Unimal. So we have the same subject, communication and media studies. And we are graduated from the same country too, but I take master there and we take the PhD, I mean Doctor Philosophy in Leipzig. I was in Turingen, next to Göttingen. Graduated 2012 from Ilmenau.
Okay.
So it's quite surprising me that you graduated from the same country, from Germany, and very interesting dissertation. I think about the struggle to create a democratic broadcasting system in Indonesia. And because I'm coming from Aceh, you know, the professor in Germany would like to know more about what happened in Aceh regarding the media report about the Free Aceh movement. I mean, the separatism organization in the past. And my dissertation, my thesis is about media reports. So now I take my PhD, my doctor at North Sumatra University. But I would like to have you, to know you well. I mean, maybe in the next future, I can share something about, I would like to know your knowledge about my dissertation. Okay, Professor, let's make it shorter. Maybe you can directly do your presentation in 20 and 25 minutes, please.
Yeah. Thank you, Mbak Kurniawati. Oh, could you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. I can hear you clearly.
Good, thank you. And thank you very much to introduce me, and we have chance to speak in Germany. Yeah? That's very interesting. And Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Best regards from Yogyakarta to the colleague in Aceh, and also other speakers that I really enjoyed the other presentation, and also the participant for today seminar. As Mbak Kurniawati introduced me, that I'm learn about media and communication. So I will share the perspective about the main topic today, the COVID-19 challenges and opportunities, constructing new social order in disruptive era, but more in insight from communication perspective. So if we take a look the latest update of the pandemic of COVID-19 in Jakarta, in Indonesia, I will bring the context in Jakarta, Mbak Kurnia. And we can see that the there is a 10 province with most COVID cases, but we can say that Indonesia hit very bad with this pandemic. So until now, Jakarta is still the biggest and the worst cases dominate comparing with other region. And with the 10 province, there is most COVID cases in Indonesia. But here, Aceh is not in this list. So lucky, yeah. So very good situation, hopefully. Then this is data from the global media Jakarta Globe that published in English. And this is, I think, good news that the case of COVID-19 in the last few weeks show maybe, hopefully, that past its peak here. I mean, although no confirmation has come from the authorities that the rate of growth in monthly total reached its lowest in October, while the 7-day average has been declining from more than 4,300 cases in late September to just around 3,300 in Sunday, the lowest weekly average, yeah, since September. And I hope that this trend decreases and finally it can be 0 cases. If not, then there is no other choice that we have to adapt to the new norm situation. So I will structuring my presentation with the three part. That first is how people in Indonesia communicate about COVID-19, this especially the adaptation to the new normal. And then the second one, the challenge and the opportunities discussion. And the third one is the future of humanity. And I hope this seminar can contribute much to many fresh idea related the contribution of social science, political science, and humanities in this topic. And this is how people in Indonesia communicate about the new normal. In my observation, that the new normal concept began to be discussed around April or May 2020 and received various responses from the community. The pros and cons are inevitable, and it is most likely due to the unclear direction from the formal authorities, the government, in a transparent and strategic manner. So criticism is also maybe caused by the positive case curve for corona in Indonesia is still climbing at that time. I will try to show you how the media coverage about this new norm agenda. You can see here that the media shows the positive vibe regarding the how a government handle with the COVID-19. So they cover that hotels ready to apply health protocols ahead of the new normal. Maybe they invite many guests to the visit for the hotel, and also there are strong discussion related with can new normal be implemented in all